Steamians, what is up? Dan at Starlight here. Today I want to talk about value and whether or not we can conceive of value as being sort of its own dimension, okay? And there's a reason for this thinking. It's like, I think there might be some practical applications for it. But again, this is not an educational video. This is like, I'm thinking about this stuff, so now I'm just turning on the camera and I'm continuing to think about it in front of the camera, and you guys can let me know what you think if you want to check it out. And I might be crazy, right? This might be crazy. Maybe not, I don't know. I think it's worth going down this road. So when we think of value as a dimension, so first of all, here's kind of where I'm starting at. So like, let's take like a point in like three-dimensional space, okay? It's like you cannot perceive that point without perceiving it at a time, right? There's no way that we can perceive a point in three-dimensional space without perceiving it also at a time. This is why Neil deGrasse Tyson says that we can think of time as a fourth dimension. It's just that it took us longer to discover it because it takes abstraction to discover it. In the same way it took abstraction to discover gravity. It took the ability to count and do math to figure out that this is a dimension that we've been living in all along, this dimension of time. It's like animals live in time. We've lived in time, but our five senses don't sense time, okay? So an animal can't really sense time. It's like our senses are really good at navigating three-dimensional space and feeling it and seeing it and touching it. But we don't have a sense for time in the sense like if you take somebody and put them in an empty room, tell them to come out in an hour, it's like they're not going to do it. Like they're probably not gonna come out exactly in an hour because they don't have a sense for it. I mean, through abstraction, they could try to count at like 60 BPM, for an hour and then come out. But I mean, that's kind of like turning yourself into a clock. It's like it's an abstract process to realize that time exists. But now we have a good understanding of time. So my question is, if that is like the criteria for deciding whether we can conceive of something as a dimension, that it's always true of a point in three-dimensional space, well then what else is also always true of a point in three-dimensional space or four-dimensional space-time, right? And I'm curious, like, is value always something that exists at any perceived point in three-dimensional space, right? And I would like I'm trying to disprove this, but it seems like it is. It's like any point in three-dimensional space, it's like you give it some value. It has some value to the perceiver, okay? Either positive, negative, good, bad, high value, low value, potentially neutral value, or like a default value that you just see as neutral. But it's like you have to, it's still, I don't think that means it's absent of value. It's just, it's on that spectrum still. Because I think you have to realize that that point, depending on how it changes over time, could eventually be something that helps you or something that hurts you, right? So there's a spectrum there. It's a spectrum that's changing. So I'm not talking about this just for, kicks. It's like I think there might be some practical application of this in the sense that maybe if we think of it as a dimension, value as a dimension, like we think of time, it's like we have a pretty good understanding of time. We can do a lot of stuff based on time now. And I'm wondering if we'll also be able to do a lot of stuff based on value, right? If we understand value better and how it interacts with every single point in four-dimensional space-time, right? So, because we move through these three dimensions and through the fourth time dimension, we move through these dimensions. Like you can choose to go someplace else, in this three-dimensional space. And I'm wondering, can we consciously have as much control over moving through our perception of value, right? And it's like I'm trying to tie together things like the law of attraction, which seems to be a very popular yet hard to prove scientifically philosophy. So I'm always trying to reconcile that type of thinking, which seems to show itself as true and resonating with our human consciousness at this point in time. So it's like, is there some connection between that, the law of attraction, and this idea that, you can vibrate at anywhere between negative and positive and live sort of on that vibration and navigate, through that field. So it's like, if you consciously, can tell a story about every single point in three-dimensional space, rather than just accepting sort of a default story about that and about its value to you. And again, a story is just an abstraction. It's just like connecting dots over time, connecting ideas over time about something that you are perceiving, okay? And it's a story that you tell that changes what value you are and where that value lands on that value scale, right? Again, you're not changing the input of anything you're perceiving, you're just changing your perception of it. You tell a different story about, a bird flies by, right? It's at a point in three-dimensional space, and it has a value that you ascribe to it. Maybe you think it's good, maybe it's a lovely bird, it's a very nice bird, it's making you feel happy, so you give it a positive value. Maybe you tell a different story about that bird and how, it's pooping on your lawn, so you give it a different, that story gives that point in three-dimensional space a different value to you, and then the bird moves through time, it runs into the window, it dies, now you got a dead bird, now you got to clean it up, it has worse value, you know what I mean? Unless it's like you can respect the life-death process maybe, and this dead bird, you're thankful for what it did, for the life that it had, and I don't know, I'm just riffing here, right? It's like, and for you it's like connecting with life and the death process to now bury this bird, and it's like, it's like the story you're telling about that interaction with a bird, or that moving point in three-dimensional space-time, is that's whatever story you're telling is deciding that what value that point also has, right? And it's like, I think this law of attraction type thinking is like realizing that any point in three-dimensional space, it's sort of up to you and the story that you tell about your perception of that point to give it a value, okay? And it's like, so any point can have a positive value for you or a negative value, and instead of just like having a default value of it thrown your way in the same way an animal just moves through time without really understanding time, it's like, maybe if we think of the time and we can abstract about it more obvious, in a more mathematical way, we can find ways of making these points all give us higher value, right? In your own perception, right? And it's like, if you get really good at thinking of anything that comes at you, at your perception, if you get good at telling stories about that in a way that make those points high value or good, then the better you're going to get at existing in a sense, in a high value sort of way, right? In a happier, positive, in a positive way. You're going to have more of that, right? And it's like, I think it's like building that muscle, right? But I think there might be some math to it as well. It's like the understanding of how much we can dissect, this range of perception of value, and that it really does apply to every little point, right? Conscious or unconscious. And a lot of it, we're going to do unconsciously, just like most of how we move through life is unconscious. But the more conscious decisions that we can make about the story to tell about the perception of a point in order to give it a higher value, right, might allow us to experience a much higher value existence, or a better life. And I'm wondering if that's kind of like what the law of attraction is kind of getting at as well. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm thinking. Like, that might be completely crazy, but whatever. It was an afternoon of kind of exploring something. I guess the takeaway is like, whether it makes sense mathematically or not, I do think it's possible that like everything that you come into contact with, that you perceive in three-dimensional space, you can think of it as a good point or a bad point. It's kind of up to you. And when I see things like that, or the law of attraction, and I see them being backed by a more logical, mathematical approach, it's easier for me to continually engage in them, because I feel like the chances of me going down the right road here are better. That's kind of why I'm trying to package these thoughts in this sort of way, or try to reconcile, these things that seem kind of true but are not. I don't have a good mental framework for it. Anyways, let me know if I'm crazy or not, or if this, is at least interesting. Dan at Starlight, peace out.